The doors of the great hall burst open before Elena Voss could finish saying her vows. A gasp ran through the crowd of wolves seated in the polished rows of the crosspack hall. Elena stood frozen at the altar, her hand still resting in Damien's, the golden light of the evening pouring through the tall windows behind them. She had practiced this moment for weeks. She had imagined the words, the ring, the quiet joy of finally becoming Damien's wife in front of the entire pack. She had not imagined this. A young woman stumbled through the doorway, one arm wrapped around her middle, her hair falling loose over her face. She looked like she might collapse at any second. Whispers rippled through the crowd immediately, and Elena felt Damien's hand slip out of hers before she even understood what was happening. "Serafina?" Damien's voice cracked with alarm. He was already moving, already crossing the space between the altar and the doorway, leaving Elena standing alone in her wedding dress, with the officiant staring awkwardly at the two of them. Elena watched her husband, only seconds away from becoming her husband, kneel beside a stranger in front of the entire pack. Serafina's breathing was ragged, her eyes wide with what looked like terror, and Damien's hands hovered over her shoulders, as though she might shatter if he touched her the wrong way. "I'm sorry," Serafina whispered, loud enough for the front rows to hear. "I didn't mean to interrupt. I felt something out in the woods. I thought someone was following me. I didn't know where else to go." Damien's jaw tightened. He turned his head toward the crowd, toward the elders seated in the front row, toward Elena standing at the altar in white. "Someone check the perimeter," he ordered, his voice sharp with authority. 2 guards peeled away from the wall and disappeared through the same doors Serafina had stumbled through. Elena stood very still. She had spent 3 years as a beta warrior in this pack, had led border patrols through territory far more dangerous than anything within a mile of the hall, and she understood, with a cold and immediate clarity, that something about this scene did not fit. Serafina's eyes were wide, yes, but they kept flicking toward the crowd, toward Damien, toward the altar. Fear did not usually look for an audience. But there was no time to think about that. Damien was already lifting Serafina to her feet, murmuring reassurances, walking her toward a chair near the front of the hall. The officiant cleared his throat and looked at Elena, unsure whether to continue the ceremony or wait. "Give us a moment," Damien called over his shoulder, not even looking back at Elena. The pack elders exchanged glances. An older wolf named Corwin, who had known Damien since he was a pup, rose from his seat with visible discomfort and approached the altar. "Elena," he said quietly, "perhaps we should pause." Elena nodded, though nodding felt like the hardest thing she had done all day. She watched Damien kneel again beside Serafina's chair, offering water, offering his own jacket to wrap around her shoulders, offering every ounce of attention that should have belonged to his bride in this very moment. The hall buzzed with murmurs. Elena caught fragments of conversation as she walked, stiff and composed, toward the side of the room. "Poor girl. Did you see how pale she looked? I heard she lost her whole pack. The Alpha is so kind to take her in." Nobody was talking about the wedding that had just been interrupted. Nobody seemed to notice that the bride was standing alone, her dress trailing across the floor, while her almost husband knelt at the feet of a stranger who had walked in through the front doors uninvited. 20 minutes passed before Damien returned to the altar. His expression was tight, apologetic, but his eyes kept drifting back toward the chair where Serafina now sat wrapped in his jacket, a healer crouched beside her taking her pulse. "I'm sorry," he said to Elena, and for a moment, she thought he might actually mean it in the way she needed him to. "She has no one else. Her whole pack was destroyed in a border raid last season. She barely escaped with her life. I couldn't just leave her outside." "I understand," Elena said, because what else was there to say in front of 200 witnesses? "Should we continue?" Damien nodded, took her hand again, and the officiant resumed the ceremony, as though nothing had happened. But something had happened, and Elena felt it settle into her chest, like a stone dropped into still water, rings spreading outward long after the vows were spoken, and the rings were exchanged, and the crowd rose to their feet in polite, distracted applause. That night, after the feast had ended, and the guests had gone home, Elena sat alone in the private study that adjoined her new chambers. She still wore her wedding dress, though she had removed the veil hours ago. Through the wall she could hear Damien's voice, low and steady, coming from the guest wing where Serafina had been given a room. She told herself it was nothing. An alpha's duty extended to every wolf under his protection, and a survivor of a pack massacre deserved comfort and care. She told herself that jealousy on her wedding night was petty, unworthy of the woman she had trained herself to be since she was 12 years old, running drills in the training yard until her knuckles bled. But she could not stop replaying the moment Serafina had stumbled through the doors. The way her eyes had searched the crowd before settling on Damien. The way her voice had carried, clear and precise, even through her supposed panic. Elena had spent years reading the body language of wolves in combat, learning to see the difference between real fear and performed fear, and something about that scene had not sat right in her stomach. She rose from her chair and walked to the window. Below in the courtyard, she could see the lights still burning in the guest wing. A shadow moved behind the curtain, tall and broad, unmistakably Damien's silhouette, still there, still lingering long after any reasonable comfort should have ended. Elena closed the curtain and returned to her chair. Tomorrow she would be the Alpha's wife in truth, mistress of the cross-pack lands, responsible for the well-being of every wolf within their borders. Tonight she was simply a woman, sitting alone in her wedding dress, listening to her husband's voice drift through the wall, comforting another woman, on the night that was supposed to belong only to the two of them. She did not cry. She had trained herself out of that particular weakness long ago, in the years after her parents died, and she learned that tears solved nothing, a blade or a plan could not solve better. Instead, she sat with her hands folded in her lap and thought carefully, methodically, about everything she had seen since Serafina walked through those doors. The girl's dress had been torn in exactly the right places to suggest a struggle, but there had been no blood, no bruising visible on her arms or face. Her breathing had been fast, yes, but her voice had never wavered, never cracked with the kind of raw fear Elena had heard from actual survivors of actual attacks. And there was the matter of timing. Of all the moments in all the days of the year, Serafina had chosen to arrive, injured and desperate, at the exact hour of Elena's wedding. It could be coincidence. Pack business rarely respected schedules, and emergencies did not wait for convenient timing. But Elena had learned, over years of leading patrols and studying threats along the border, that coincidence was often simply a pattern nobody had bothered to examine closely enough. She stood again and walked to her desk, pulling out a small leather journal she had kept since her training days, filled with notes on tactics and observations from years of service to the pack. She opened to a blank page and, in careful handwriting, began to write down everything she remembered about the evening. The torn dress, the dry eyes, the voice that carried instead of trembled, the way Serafina's gaze had moved across the crowd before finding Damien, as though she already knew exactly where he would be standing. It was not proof of anything. Elena knew that. A suspicious mind could construct a conspiracy out of nothing but grief and jealousy, and she refused to let herself become the kind of wife who saw enemies in every guest who needed help. But she also refused to be the kind of wife who ignored her instincts, simply because acting on them might be uncomfortable. She closed the journal and set it back in the drawer, locking it with the small brass key she kept on a chain around her neck. Whatever Serafina Vale turned out to be, whether a genuine survivor deserving of every kindness or something else entirely, Elena decided she would watch, and wait, and gather what evidence the truth required before she said a single word to anyone. The following morning, Elena rose before dawn, as she always did, and dressed in her training clothes instead of the fine gowns expected of an alpha's wife. She needed the training yard, the familiar weight of a practice blade in her hand, the clean exhaustion of physical effort to clear the fog that had settled over her thoughts during the sleepless night. The yard was empty at that hour, the morning mist still clinging to the grass, and Elena welcomed the solitude. She ran through her forms slowly at first, then faster, letting her body remember movements that had been carved into her muscles since childhood. Strike, block, pivot, strike again. The rhythm steadied her breathing, and, eventually, her mind. She was midway through a combination when she heard footsteps approaching from the direction of the guest wing. She lowered her blade and turned, expecting perhaps a servant or an early rising guard, and instead found herself looking at Serafina, dressed in a simple gray gown, her hair now neatly braided, her face calm and unbothered, in a way that looked nothing like the trembling wreck from the night before. "Good morning," Serafina said, her voice light and pleasant. I didn't expect anyone else to be awake this early. I train every morning, Elena replied evenly, studying the other woman's posture, the easy way she stood, the complete absence of the fragility she had displayed so dramatically only hours earlier. I hope you slept well, given everything you went through. Something flickered across Serafina's face, there and gone so quickly that Elena might have imagined it if she had not been trained to notice exactly this kind of detail. As well as I could, Serafina said, and her voice dropped slightly, taking on a softer, more delicate tone than the one she had just used. I'm sorry again for ruining your wedding. I feel terrible about it. You didn't ruin anything, Elena said, though the words tasted false in her mouth. I'm glad Damien was able to help you. He's very kind, Serafina said, and this time there was no mistaking the warmth in her voice, a warmth that seemed to belong to someone speaking about far more than gratitude toward a rescuer. I don't know what I would have done without him. Elena held her gaze for a long moment, searching for any sign of the trembling, frightened girl from the previous evening. She found none. Serafina stood tall, steady, entirely composed, speaking with the confidence of a woman who had never known a single day of true fear in her life. I should return to my training, Elena said finally, turning back toward the center of the yard. Of course, Serafina replied. It was lovely to properly meet you, Elena. Elena did not answer. She raised her blade and resumed her forms, listening to the sound of Serafina's footsteps retreating back toward the guest wing, and beneath the steady rhythm of strike and block and pivot, a single thought settled into her mind with quiet certainty. Whatever story Serafina Vale was telling the pack, it was not the whole truth, and Elena intended to find out exactly what she was hiding. 3 days after the wedding, Elena found herself presiding over her first council meeting as the Alpha's wife. The role came with responsibilities she had studied for years in preparation, matters of trade routes, border patrols, and the allocation of resources across the pack's territory. She sat at Damien's right hand, exactly where tradition placed her, and tried to focus on the reports being read aloud by the pack's treasurer. But her attention kept drifting to the empty chair across the room, the one that had been added to the council table only that morning at Damien's request. A chair for Serafina, he had explained, so she could feel included while she recovered from her ordeal. Elena had said nothing in response, though the addition of an unelected, untested newcomer to a council meant to govern pack affairs struck her as deeply unusual. Serafina did not attend the meeting. A servant arrived halfway through to explain that she was resting, still shaken from the events of recent days, and Damien nodded with visible concern before returning his attention to the council. Elena watched the exchange and filed it away with the rest of her observations. A woman too frail to attend a council meeting, but strong enough to walk through a forest alone at night without so much as a scratch on her hands. After the meeting ended, Elena lingered in the hall, watching the elders file out in 2s and 3s, murmuring among themselves. Corwin, the oldest of the council members, approached her with an expression she could not quite read. You handled yourself well today, he said. Better than most new wives manage in their first month. Thank you, Elena said. I've been preparing for this role for a long time. Corwin studied her for a moment, his old eyes sharp despite his age. I noticed you watching the empty chair, he said quietly. You're not the only one who finds its presence strange. Elena's pulse quickened slightly, though she kept her expression neutral. The Alpha is generous with those who need protection. Generous, yes, Corwin agreed. Though generosity and wisdom do not always walk the same path, he glanced around the emptying hall before lowering his voice further. Be careful, child. Grief can be a powerful disguise, and not everyone who wears it is telling the truth about what lies underneath. Before Elena could respond, Corwin nodded politely and walked away, leaving her alone with his words echoing in her mind. She had not expected an ally so soon, and certainly not one as respected and cautious as Corwin, who had served 3 generations of Alphas and rarely spoke without careful consideration. That evening, as the sun set over the packlands, Elena walked the perimeter of the estate alone, a habit she had maintained since her earliest days of training. The exercise cleared her mind and allowed her to notice details that might otherwise slip past unnoticed during the business of daily life. Tonight, as she rounded the corner near the eastern garden, She noticed a figure moving quickly along the tree line, moving with a grace and speed entirely unlike the careful, delicate steps Serafina had displayed in front of the council and the pack. Elena paused behind a hedge, watching. The figure was unmistakably Serafina, dressed now in dark, practical clothing, instead of the soft gowns she wore during the day. She moved through the trees with the confidence of someone who had trained for years in exactly this kind of terrain, ducking beneath low branches and adjusting her stride without hesitation or fear. Elena's breath caught. This was not the walk of a traumatized survivor limping through unfamiliar territory. This was the walk of a trained fighter, moving through a forest she knew intimately, or at least one she had studied carefully enough to navigate without a single misstep in the fading evening light. She followed at a distance, staying low and silent, using every skill she had honed over years of border patrol work. Serafina moved deeper into the trees until she reached a small clearing where another figure waited, hooded and half hidden in shadow. Elena crouched behind a fallen log, straining to hear the conversation carried on the evening wind. "Taking longer than expected," the hooded figure said, voice low and impatient. "How much longer do you need?" "As long as it takes," Serafina replied, and her voice had changed entirely from the soft, breathless tone she used in front of the pack. It was sharp now, controlled, carrying an authority that startled Elena more than anything else she had witnessed since the wedding. "He trusts me completely. The wife suspects something, but suspicion means nothing without proof." Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. She strained to hear more, but the wind shifted and carried the rest of their words away, leaving her with only fragments and a growing certainty that she had stumbled onto something far larger and more dangerous than a simple case of misplaced sympathy. The hooded figure said something else, too quiet to make out, and Serafina laughed, a short, cold sound that bore no resemblance to the fragile laughter Elena had heard from her during meals in the great hall. Then the figure turned and disappeared into the deeper darkness of the forest, and Serafina straightened her shoulders and began walking back toward the estate, her stride once again shifting into something softer and more hesitant as she approached the edge of the trees. Elena waited until both figures were gone before she allowed herself to move, her legs shaking slightly from the tension of remaining hidden and still for so long. She made her way back to the estate through a different path, her mind racing through everything she had just witnessed. A hidden meeting, a voice stripped of pretense, a statement that could only mean one thing. Serafina Vale was not a grieving survivor seeking protection. She was playing a role, carefully and deliberately, with a goal Elena had not yet uncovered but intended to expose no matter what it cost her. That night, she returned to her study and opened her locked journal, adding page after page of notes about what she had seen and heard. The torn dress with no visible wounds, the confident stride through unfamiliar woods, the secret meeting in the clearing, the cold, calculating voice that had emerged the moment Serafina believed no one was watching. She thought of Corwin's warning, of grief being a powerful disguise, and understood now just how right he had been. She thought of Damien, sitting beside Serafina's bed each night, offering comfort and protection to a woman who did not need either, all while his true wife sat alone in the shadows, piecing together a truth he refused to see. Elena closed the journal and pressed her palm flat against its leather cover, steadying her breathing. She would need proof, real and undeniable proof, before she brought any of this to Damien. He would not believe suspicion born from a single overheard conversation, not when his heart had already been so thoroughly claimed by whatever performance Serafina had constructed. But proof could be gathered, patiently and carefully, and Elena had never once in her life backed away from a difficult task simply because it demanded patience. She rose from her desk and walked to the window, looking out over the moonlit grounds toward the guest wing, where a single light still burned behind Serafina's curtains. Somewhere out there, a stranger with a hidden agenda had walked into her wedding, into her home, into her husband's heart, and Elena intended to find out exactly what that agenda was, before it cost the pack everything it had built. Elena spent the next several days observing Serafina from a careful distance, cataloging every small inconsistency she noticed. At breakfast, Serafina ate with delicate, hesitant bites, as though her stomach could barely handle solid food, yet Elena once glimpsed her finishing an entire plate of roasted meat in the kitchen, when she believed no one was watching, eating with the brisk efficiency of someone who had gone hungry many times before and never wanted to feel that way again. In the gardens, she walked with a slight limp when Damien was nearby, leaning on his arm for support, but Elena watched from an upstairs window one afternoon as Serafina crossed the same garden alone, moving without a trace of that limp, her steps quick and purposeful. Each observation added another layer to the picture forming in Elena's mind, but none of it amounted to proof that would convince a council, let alone an alpha, whose heart had been captured so completely. She needed something undeniable, something that could not be explained away as coincidence or misunderstanding. The opportunity came on a morning when Elena arrived at the training yard earlier than usual, before the sun had fully cleared the horizon. She expected to find the yard empty, as it always was at that hour, and instead found Serafina already there, moving through a series of combat forms with a precision that made Elena stop dead in the doorway. Serafina held a practice blade in a stance Elena recognized immediately, a defensive posture taught only to warriors trained in structured combat schools, the kind of training that took years to master and left permanent marks on the way a body moved through space. She flowed from one position to the next with the fluid confidence of someone who had spent countless hours perfecting exactly these movements, her breathing controlled, her focus absolute. Elena remained frozen in the doorway, watching as Serafina executed a combination Elena herself had only mastered after 2 years of dedicated training under one of the pack's most demanding instructors. There was no trembling here, no fragility, no trace of the wounded survivor who flinched at loud noises and needed an alpha's constant reassurance to feel safe. A twig snapped beneath Elena's boot, and Serafina's head whipped around instantly, her eyes sharp and alert, scanning the yard for the source of the sound before landing on Elena standing in the doorway. For a moment, neither woman spoke. Elena watched something calculating flicker across Serafina's face, quick as lightning, before it dissolved into a mask of wide-eyed surprise. "Elena," Serafina said, her voice suddenly higher, softer, laced with breathless anxiety. "I didn't hear you come in. I found this old blade in the training shed and thought I might try to remember some of what my father taught me, before everything happened. It helps me feel closer to him." The explanation was smooth, almost too smooth, delivered without a single stumble, despite the supposed shock of being caught. Elena studied her carefully, noting the way Serafina's hands still held the practice blade in a proper fighting grip, not the loose, unfamiliar hold of someone who had merely watched her father train decades ago. "That's quite advanced form for something learned so long ago," Elena said, keeping her tone light, curious rather than accusatory. "You move very well." Something flashed in Serafina's eyes, gone as quickly as it appeared. "I suppose the body remembers things the mind tries to forget," she said, setting the blade down carefully and wrapping her arms around herself in a posture of sudden vulnerability. "Please don't tell Damien. He worries so much already. I don't want him thinking I'm trying to be something I'm not." Elena considered the request for a long moment, watching Serafina's transformation from confident warrior to fragile survivor happen in the space of a single conversation, like watching an actor change costumes between scenes. "Of course," Elena said finally. "Your secret is safe with me." She left the training yard without another word, her mind churning with everything she had just witnessed. The blade work she had seen was not the rusty, half-remembered movements of a woman recalling childhood lessons. It was the precise, disciplined technique of someone who trained regularly, someone who had perhaps never stopped training at all, despite the story she told everyone in the pack about being a helpless, injured survivor, with nothing left but her grief. That afternoon, Elena sought out Tobias, a beta warrior who had served alongside her during her years of border patrol, and whom she trusted more than almost anyone else in the pack, save perhaps Corwin himself. She found him in the armory, sharpening blades with the methodical patience that had made him one of the most reliable soldiers she had ever worked alongside. "I need your help with something," Elena said, closing the armory door behind her to ensure their privacy. "But I need you to trust me without asking too many questions yet." Tobias set down the blade he had been working on and studied her expression, his own face growing serious. "You have that look you used to get before we walked into ambush territory," he said. "What's going on?" Elena hesitated, weighing how much to reveal. She trusted Tobias, but she also understood the danger of accusing an alpha's protected guest without solid proof, especially when that alpha happened to be her own husband. "I believe Serafina Vale is not who she claims to be," Elena said finally. "I've seen things that don't match her story. Combat training she shouldn't have, a secret meeting in the forest, behavior that changes completely depending on who's watching." Tobias's expression darkened. "That's a serious accusation to make against someone the alpha has taken under his protection." "I know," Elena said, "which is exactly why I need proof before I say anything to him. Real proof, not suspicion, not instinct, something undeniable." Tobias was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing the risks of involving himself in something that could easily backfire if Elena's suspicions proved wrong, or worse, if they proved right, and made powerful enemies within the pack's own walls. Finally, he nodded. "What do you need from me?" "I need eyes on her when I can't be there," Elena said. "I need to know where she goes, who she meets, what she does when she thinks no one important is watching. And I need someone I trust to help me gather evidence carefully enough that no one can accuse us of fabricating it." Tobias exhaled slowly. "Elena, if you're wrong about this, it could destroy your standing in the pack. Accusing a survivor of deception, especially one the alpha has personally taken under his wing, that's not something people forgive easily, even if you're his wife." "I know the risk," Elena said, "but I also know what I saw. Someone this practiced at deception doesn't walk into a wedding by accident. Whatever she's planning, it's bigger than a simple lie about a destroyed pack, and I intend to find out exactly what it is before it's too late to stop." Tobias studied her for another long moment, before finally nodding, the decision settling into his shoulders with visible weight. "All right," he said. "I'll help, but we do this carefully. No mistakes, no assumptions we can't back up. If we're going to accuse an alpha's protected guest of deception, we need to be absolutely certain before we say a single word." Elena nodded, relief loosening some of the tension that had been coiled in her chest since the wedding day. "Thank you," she said. "I won't forget this." As she left the armory, Elena felt the first genuine sense of hope she had experienced since Serafina walked through those doors. She was no longer alone in her suspicions. She had an ally in Tobias, a cautious sympathizer in Corwin, and a growing collection of observations that, piece by piece, were beginning to form a picture far more troubling than a simple case of a grieving woman leaning too heavily on an alpha's kindness. But she also understood, with a clarity that settled cold and heavy in her stomach, that whatever Serafina Vale was truly after, she would not give up her carefully constructed disguise without a fight. And if the woman was skilled enough in combat to move like a trained warrior while pretending to be helpless, skilled enough to hold secret meetings in the forest, while maintaining a flawless performance in front of the entire pack, then she was almost certainly dangerous enough to strike back the moment she sensed her secret was in danger of being exposed. Elena walked back toward the main estate as the afternoon sun began its slow descent toward evening, her mind already racing ahead to the next steps she would need to take, the evidence she would need to gather, and the careful, patient work of exposing a lie so deeply embedded within her own home that undoing it might require every skill she had ever learned in her years of service to the pack. Whispers began circulating through the pack within a week, small at first, then growing louder as they passed from servant to servant, warrior to warrior, until they reached corners of the estate Elena had never expected them to travel. She noticed the change in how people looked at her during meals, the way conversations quieted slightly when she entered a room, the careful, pitying glances from women who had once greeted her warmly in the hallways. It was Mara, the pack's elder healer, who finally told her the truth of what was being said. Mara had tended to Elena's injuries countless times over the years of border patrol work, and the two women shared a bond built on mutual respect that went back long before Damien had entered either of their lives. "They're saying you've been cruel to her," Mara said one evening, as she helped Elena treat a minor training injury in the quiet of the healer's chambers. "That you corner her when no one else is around. That you've threatened her, made her feel unsafe in her own home." Elena felt something cold settle in her stomach. "That's not true," she said. "I've barely spoken to her since the wedding." "I believe you," Mara said, wrapping a bandage around Elena's forearm with practiced hands. "But belief and proof are different things. And right now, the whole pack believes the version of events that paints you as jealous and unkind. She's very good at making people feel sorry for her, Elena. I've watched her do it in front of the council, in the kitchens, even with the children who play in the gardens. Everyone who spends more than a few minutes with her comes away convinced she's the most fragile creature they've ever met. Where is this coming from? Elena asked. Who is spreading these stories? Mara hesitated, glancing toward the door as though worried someone might overhear. The servants talk, she said quietly. Serafina has been confiding in several of the younger maids, telling them how frightened she is of you, how she flinches whenever you enter a room because she worries you'll report her to Damien for taking up too much space in his life. The maids repeat it, out of sympathy, and the story grows with every retelling. Elena absorbed this information slowly, feeling the full weight of what she was up against settling onto her shoulders. Serafina was not simply deceiving Damien. She was systematically constructing a narrative throughout the entire pack, one designed to isolate Elena, to paint her as the villain in a story where Serafina played the innocent victim, all while committing whatever true crime she was planning behind the scenes. I need to find whoever she's meeting in the woods, Elena said. The hooded figure I saw. If I can identify them, I might be able to trace where this plan is actually coming from. Mara finished the bandage and sat back, studying Elena with concern, etched across her weathered face. Be careful, she said. If she's clever enough to turn the entire pack against you with nothing but a few sympathetic tears, she's clever enough to notice if you start investigating too openly. You'll need to be smarter than she is, not just more determined. Elena nodded, understanding the truth of that warning more deeply with each passing day. That night, she met with Tobias in a small storage room near the eastern wing, far from the busy corridors where servants might overhear their conversation. I've been watching her, Tobias said without preamble, once the door was closed and locked behind them. You were right about the meetings. She slips out at least twice a week, always after dark, always taking a different path through the woods to avoid detection. I followed her 3 nights ago and saw her meet the same hooded figure again, near the old mill ruins by the river. Did you hear anything? Elena asked. Tobias shook his head. I couldn't get close enough without risking discovery, but I did notice something else. The hooded figure wore a signet ring on his hand, gold with a black stone in the center. I've seen that mark before, Elena. It belongs to the Thornwood pack. Elena's breath caught. The Thornwood pack had been a rival territory bordering the Crosslands for generations, their relationship with Damien's family marked by decades of uneasy tension and occasional outright conflict over disputed hunting grounds. If Serafina was secretly meeting with someone from Thornwood, the implications stretched far beyond a simple personal deception. This was beginning to look like something far more calculated, something that threatened not just Elena's marriage, but the security of the entire pack. We need more than a signet ring, Elena said, forcing her mind to slow down and think clearly, despite the alarm racing through her chest. We need to know exactly what she's planning, and we need proof, solid enough that Damien cannot dismiss it as jealousy or misunderstanding. There's something else, Tobias said, his voice grim. I overheard one of the guards mention that supplies have gone missing from the eastern storehouse. Weapons, mostly, and a small amount of coin. Nothing large enough to draw immediate suspicion, but enough that someone patient could be building towards something over time. Elena's mind raced through the possibilities, each one darker than the last. A rival pack, a pattern of theft, a woman skilled enough in combat to disguise it behind a mask of fragility, skilled enough in manipulation to turn an entire pack against the one person capable of seeing through her lies. Whatever Serafina Vale was planning, it was not a simple matter of securing Damien's affection or protection. It was something larger, something that threatened the very foundation of everything Elena had sworn to protect. I need to visit the region she claims to be from, Elena said finally. If her story about her homeland is false, that will be the first crack in the foundation of everything she's built here. I need proof that predates her arrival, something that shows exactly who she was before she walked through those doors. Tobias frowned. That's a long journey, Elena. Days there and back, at minimum. And if Damien asks why his wife suddenly needs to travel to a border region with no clear diplomatic purpose, what will you tell him? Elena considered the question carefully. I'll tell him I'm assessing trade routes for the council, she said. It's not entirely untrue. The Eastern Territories have needed evaluation for months, and no one will question a beta warrior turned alpha's wife taking on diplomatic responsibilities. And if you're right about her connections to Thornwood, Tobias said slowly, traveling alone into contested border territory could be exactly the kind of opportunity someone like her would want. If she suspects you're investigating her, sending you into unfamiliar territory, near a rival pack's influence, could be a convenient way to remove you from the equation entirely. The warning settled heavily in the room, and Elena understood the risk clearly enough without needing it spelled out further. But she also understood that inaction carried its own dangers, perhaps greater ones. Every day Serafina remained unchallenged was another day she strengthened her hold over Damien, over the pack's sympathy, over whatever plan was slowly taking shape in the shadows beyond the estate's walls. "I'll take precautions," Elena said. "I won't travel the main roads, and I won't announce my route to anyone outside this room. If she's watching for an opportunity, I don't intend to give her an obvious one." Tobias nodded slowly, though his expression remained troubled. "I'll cover for you here," he said. "I'll keep watching her movements and report anything significant. And Elena, for what it's worth, I believe you. Whatever she is, she's not what she pretends to be, and the pack deserves to know the truth before she gets whatever it is she's actually after." Elena thanked him and left the storage room, making her way back through the quiet corridors toward her own chambers. As she passed the guest wing, she caught a glimpse of light beneath Serafina's door and paused, listening for a moment to the silence beyond it. Somewhere behind that door, a woman who had convinced an entire pack of her fragility was likely planning her next move, patient and calculating, while everyone around her remained blind to the danger she represented. Elena continued walking, her resolve hardening with every step. She had faced worse dangers than a single deceptive woman during her years of border patrol, had outmaneuvered enemies far more experienced in the arts of war and strategy. Whatever Serafina Vale had planned, whatever alliance she had formed with the Thornwood pack, Elena intended to unravel it thread by careful thread, until the truth stood exposed for the entire pack to see, no matter how long it took, or how dangerous the path to get there might become. The forest thickened around Elena as she rode further from the cross-pack lands, the trees growing taller and more tangled with each passing mile, until sunlight barely reached the narrow trail beneath her horse's hooves. She had left before dawn, telling only Tobias and Corwin of her true destination, and had spent 2 full days traveling through terrain she knew only from old maps and second-hand reports gathered during her years of border patrol training. The region Serafina claimed as her destroyed homeland lay just beyond the northern ridge, a stretch of territory that had once belonged to a modest pack known as the Ashford Wolves. Elena had studied every scrap of information she could find before leaving, and none of it matched the story Serafina had told the Cross-Pack Council. There had been no reported raids in that region in over 3 years, no records of a devastating attack that could account for the destruction of an entire pack. As Elena crested the ridge on the 3rd day of her journey, she found the Ashford territory not in ruins but simply quiet, a small, functioning settlement nestled in a valley below, smoke rising peacefully from a handful of chimneys. Her stomach tightened. If the Ashford pack still stood, intact and unburned, then everything Serafina had told Damien and the entire Cross Council was a fabrication built from nothing. She approached the settlement carefully, dismounting at the edge of the valley and leading her horse the rest of the way on foot, presenting herself as a traveling diplomat, interested in trade relations, rather than revealing her true purpose. The pack's alpha, an older wolf named Garrick, received her cautiously in his modest hall, clearly unaccustomed to visitors from the powerful Cross territory. "We don't often see representatives from Damien Cross's lands," Garrick said, studying Elena with careful eyes. "What brings you so far from home?" Elena chose her words carefully. "I'm gathering information about the border regions for our council's records," she said. "I understand your pack experienced some difficulties in recent years. A raid, perhaps?" Garrick's brow furrowed in genuine confusion. "A raid? We've had no raids in this territory in over a decade. Our last serious conflict was with a group of rogue wolves nearly 15 years ago, and even that was resolved without significant losses." He paused, studying her more closely. "Why do you ask?" Elena felt the last of her doubts crumble away, replaced by a cold, certain understanding of exactly what she was dealing with. "I apologize for the confusion," she said. "I must have received inaccurate information. Tell me, has anyone left your pack in recent years? Perhaps someone who might have claimed elsewhere that your territory was destroyed?" Garrick's expression shifted, something guarded and uncomfortable crossing his features. He glanced toward one of his advisors before answering, and Elena recognized the look of a leader deciding how much of an unpleasant truth to share with a stranger. "There was a woman," he said finally. "Serafina. She was exiled from this pack nearly 2 years ago." Elena's pulse quickened, though she kept her expression carefully neutral. "May I ask why?" Garrick exhaled slowly, the weight of old memories visible in the tension around his eyes. "She was skilled, more skilled than most warriors twice her age, and ambitious in ways that eventually became dangerous to the stability of this pack. She manipulated several of our younger members, turned them against each other, stole resources meant for the pack's defenses, and when we finally uncovered the extent of her deceptions, she had already caused significant damage to trust within our ranks. We exiled her rather than pursue harsher punishment, hoping she would find somewhere else to build a life that didn't require destroying the people around her." "Do you know where she went after leaving?" Elena asked, though she already suspected the answer. "We heard rumors she spent time with the Thornwood pack for a period," Garrick said. "Beyond that, we lost track of her movements. We hoped never to hear her name again." Elena thanked Garrick for his honesty and made arrangements to depart the following morning, her mind racing through the implications of everything she had just learned. Serafina Vale was not a grieving survivor of a destroyed pack. She was an exiled manipulator, with documented history of turning packs against themselves from within. Someone who had already demonstrated a pattern of ambition and deception long before she ever arrived at Damien's wedding, with her carefully torn dress and her performance of fragile terror. The connection to Thornwood only deepened Elena's concerns. If Serafina had spent time with that rival pack after her exile, and if she was now secretly meeting with someone bearing a Thornwood signet ring, the pieces of a much larger and more dangerous plan were beginning to align in Elena's mind. This was not simply about winning Damien's affection or securing a comfortable position within the cross-pack. This looked like the early stages of something designed to weaken the cross-pack from within, perhaps in preparation for a larger conflict or takeover orchestrated by Thornwood itself. That night, as Elena settled into a small inn near the edge of Ashford territory, she found herself unable to sleep, her mind cycling through the pieces of evidence she had gathered and the steps she would need to take once she returned home. She had the testimony of an entire pack's alpha confirming that Serafina's story was fabricated. She had Tobias's observation of secret meetings with someone connected to a rival territory. She had her own eyewitness account of Serafina's combat training, utterly inconsistent with the fragile persona she maintained in front of Damien and the council. It was proof, real and substantial proof, but Elena understood that proof alone might not be enough to overcome the depth of Damien's attachment to the story Serafina had constructed. She would need to present everything carefully, methodically, in a setting where Damien could not simply dismiss her concerns as jealousy or overreaction. She would need witnesses, documentation, and perhaps most importantly, a moment where Serafina's true nature could not be denied or explained away. A sound outside her window pulled Elena from her thoughts, faint but distinct, the crunch of footsteps on gravel beneath her second-floor room. She rose quietly, moving to the window without lighting a candle, and peered down into the darkness of the inn's small courtyard. A figure stood near the stables, cloaked and hooded despite the mild evening air, speaking quietly with the innkeeper's son. Elena's instincts sharpened immediately. She had told no one at the Cross estate the specific details of her route beyond Tobias and Corwin, and she had taken careful precautions to avoid being followed. But a figure lurking outside her lodging in unfamiliar territory, so far from home, felt like more than mere coincidence. She dressed quickly and quietly, strapping a hidden blade to her thigh beneath her traveling clothes, and made her way down the inn's back staircase, avoiding the main entrance where the hooded figure might still be watching. The night air was cool against her skin as she slipped out through a side door, moving along the shadowed edge of the building toward the stables. The hooded figure was gone by the time she reached the courtyard, but the innkeeper's son remained, counting a small stack of coins with visible nervousness. He startled when Elena approached, nearly dropping the coins onto the gravel. "Who was that?" Elena asked, keeping her voice low and even. The young man hesitated, clearly weighing whether to answer honestly. "A traveler," he said finally. "Asked about a woman matching your description, whether anyone new had come through recently asking questions about the Ashford pack. Paid well for the information." Elena felt a chill settle over her despite the mild evening air. Someone had known she would come here, or had at least anticipated the possibility, and had positioned a watcher to track her movements. "What did you tell him?" she asked. "Only that a traveler had arrived asking about trade routes," the young man said quickly. "I didn't mention anything about the Ashford history. I swear it." Elena thanked him, though her mind was already racing through the implications of being watched so far from home. If Serafina or her allies had anticipated Elena's investigation and taken steps to monitor her movements, then her suspicions about the scope and danger of this conspiracy were even more justified than she had feared. She returned to her room, packed her belongings, and decided to depart before dawn rather than wait for the scheduled morning departure, taking a different route back toward the Cross territory than the one she had originally planned. The journey home passed without further incident, though Elena remained vigilant every mile of the way, watching the tree line for signs of pursuit, keeping her hand near her blade at every rest stop along the trail. By the time the familiar towers of the Cross estate came into view on the horizon, she felt both relief at surviving the journey and a renewed, sharpened determination to bring Serafina Vale's deception into the light, no matter how carefully constructed her disguise had become, or how dangerous her allies proved to be. Elena returned to the Cross estate to find the atmosphere shifted in ways that unsettled her even more than the discoveries she had made during her journey. Damien had missed 2 council meetings in her absence, sending word each time that urgent matters concerning Serafina's well-being required his personal attention. The Treasury reports Elena reviewed upon her return showed unusual expenditures approved without full council discussion, funds redirected toward what was described only as personal comfort accommodations for the pack's newest and most protected guest. She found Damien in his study late that evening, poring over documents with a distracted expression that barely lifted when she entered the room. "You're back," he said, glancing up briefly before returning his attention to the papers spread across his desk. "I trust the border assessment went well." "It was informative," Elena said carefully, studying her husband's face for any sign of the man she had fallen in love with during their years of courtship, a man known throughout the pack for his sharp judgment and unwavering attention to duty. The man before her now seemed diminished somehow, his focus scattered, his usual confidence replaced by a distracted weariness that seemed to have settled into him during her absence. "Damien, we need to talk about Serafina," Elena said, deciding the moment had come to test whether any part of him remained open to hearing difficult truths. His expression shifted immediately, defensive lines forming around his eyes. "If this is about the training yard again, Elena, I've already explained that a woman finding comfort in familiar movements from her past is nothing to be suspicious of." "It's not about the training yard," Elena said, though she filed away his immediate defensiveness as further confirmation of how thoroughly Serafina had shaped his perspective. "I traveled to the Ashford territory during my journey. The pack she claims was destroyed still stands, Damien. Fully intact, there was no raid." For a moment, something flickered across Damien's face, a shadow of doubt that gave Elena a fragile flicker of hope, but it vanished almost as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a hardening resolve that troubled her more than outright anger would have. "Perhaps you spoke to the wrong pack," he said. "Or perhaps her memories of the event are distorted by trauma. People who survive terrible things don't always remember details accurately." "Damien, I spoke directly with their alpha. He confirmed she was exiled from the pack nearly 2 years ago, not driven out by any raid. He described a pattern of manipulation and theft that eventually became too dangerous to ignore." Damien's jaw tightened, and when he spoke again, his voice carried an edge Elena had never heard directed at her before. "Do you understand what you're accusing her of? A woman who has already suffered enough to make her doubt every person who claims to want to help her, and now my own wife wants to add to that suffering by spreading stories about her being some kind of criminal." "I'm not spreading stories," Elena said, struggling to keep her voice steady, despite the hurt blooming beneath her composure. "I'm telling you what I found, what I witnessed with my own eyes in the training yard. What Tobias witnessed during her secret meetings in the forest with someone wearing a Thornwood signet ring." The mention of Thornwood seemed to land differently than her previous points, a brief crack appearing in Damien's certainty. "Thornwood," he repeated slowly. "You're certain about that detail?" "Tobias saw the ring clearly," Elena said, sensing an opening and pressing forward carefully. "Damien, please, I'm not asking you to condemn her without proof. I'm asking you to simply consider the possibility that everything might not be exactly as it appears. Let me gather more evidence. Let me show you what I've found before you dismiss it entirely." Damien was quiet for a long moment, his gaze drifting toward the window, toward the guest wing, where Serafina's chambers waited beyond the darkened glass. Elena watched the internal struggle play across his features, hope and doubt warring against whatever powerful attachment Serafina had cultivated in him during the weeks of Elena's growing suspicion. "I'll consider what you've told me," he said finally, though his tone carried little conviction. "But Elena, I need you to understand something. If you're wrong about this, if you're allowing jealousy or discomfort with sharing my attention to color your judgment, the damage to this pack's reputation for compassion could be significant. We cannot be seen as a pack that turns against vulnerable survivors based on unproven suspicions." Elena wanted to argue that her evidence was far beyond mere suspicion, that an exiled woman with documented history of manipulation, secret meetings with a rival pack, and combat skills inconsistent with her claimed trauma represented something far more serious than simple discomfort, but she recognized the futility of pushing further in this moment. Damien's defenses were raised too high, his attachment to Serafina's narrative too deeply entrenched to be dismantled by words alone, no matter how carefully constructed or well supported by evidence. "I understand," Elena said instead, retreating to a more patient strategy. "I'll continue gathering information. When I have something undeniable, something you cannot possibly dismiss, I'll bring it to you and the full council together." Damien nodded, some of the tension easing from his shoulders, now that the conversation seemed to be resolving without further conflict. "Thank you for understanding," he said. "I know this situation has been difficult for you. I promise, once I'm certain she's safe and stable, things will return to normal between us." Elena left his study that night with a hollow feeling settling into her chest, the growing realization that Damien's promise of normalcy might never arrive so long as Serafina remained embedded so deeply within his sense of protective duty. She understood now, with painful clarity, that words and testimony alone would not be enough to break through the wall Serafina had built around Damien's judgment. She would need something undeniable, something that could not be explained away or attributed to misunderstanding, a moment where Serafina's true nature revealed itself so completely that even Damien's deepest attachment could not deny it. The following days brought further complications. Elena discovered that a valuable pendant, a family heirloom passed down through generations of cross-pack matriarchs, had gone missing from her personal chambers. When she reported the theft to the household staff, she learned that Serafina had been seen near her wing on the same afternoon the pendant disappeared, though no direct evidence linked her to the theft itself. More troubling still, whispers began reaching Elena's ears that Serafina had confided in several council members about feeling threatened by Elena's recent behavior, describing vague but unsettling encounters that painted Elena as increasingly unstable and dangerous. The narrative was shifting, slowly but deliberately, from Elena as a concerned wife investigating legitimate suspicions, toward Elena as an unstable threat that the pack needed to monitor and contain. Elena recognized the pattern immediately, the same careful manipulation Garrick had described from the Ashford pack's own painful experience, but recognizing the pattern did little to slow its progression. Serafina was skilled, patient, and utterly ruthless in her execution, turning every one of Elena's careful investigations into fresh evidence of Elena's own supposed instability and jealousy. That evening, Elena met again with Tobias and Mara, in the same secluded storage room they had used before, the three of them speaking in hushed, urgent tones as they assessed the deteriorating situation. "She's moving faster than I expected," Elena admitted. "If this continues, the council will turn against me before I ever get the chance to present real evidence." "We need to force her hand," Tobias said. "Something that reveals her true skills and her true nature in front of witnesses who cannot be dismissed or discredited afterward." Mara nodded slowly, an idea forming behind her thoughtful expression. "The Border Patrol," she said. "There's a scheduled patrol along the eastern ridge in 3 days, an area known for occasional skirmishes with rogue wolves. If Serafina believed herself in genuine danger during that patrol, with witnesses present who have no stake in either side of this conflict, her true instincts would emerge. A real trauma survivor would freeze or flee. Someone trained in combat, someone hiding true skill beneath a mask of fragility, would react very differently." Elena considered the plan carefully, weighing the risks against the potential reward. It was dangerous, staging any kind of confrontation near an area with genuine threats, but she understood that patience alone had failed to slow Serafina's advancing narrative. Sometimes the only way to expose a carefully constructed lie was to create circumstances where the lie could no longer sustain itself. "We'll need to control the situation carefully," Elena said. "No real danger to anyone involved, but enough perceived threat that her instincts take over before she has time to remember which mask she's supposed to be wearing." Tobias nodded, already beginning to work through the logistics in his mind. "I can arrange for a controlled scenario," he said. "Something that looks convincing without any genuine risk to those involved. If we're careful, we can capture proof that even Damien cannot dismiss." Elena felt a cautious flicker of hope for the first time since her return from Ashford territory. The plan carried risks, certainly, but it also offered the first real path toward exposing Serafina's deception in a way that could not be twisted or explained away. Whatever mask the woman wore in front of the pack, whatever careful performance she had perfected over months of manipulation, Elena intended to strip it away completely, once and for all, before it cost the crosspack everything they had worked so hard to protect. The eastern ridge stretched out beneath a gray morning sky, mist still clinging to the low valleys, as the patrol group assembled at the edge of the cross territory. Elena had arranged the outing carefully, presenting it to Damien as a diplomatic gesture, an opportunity for Serafina to see more of the lands she now called home, accompanied by a full contingent of guards for her protection and comfort. Damien had agreed readily, relieved that Elena seemed to be extending an olive branch after their tense conversation days earlier. Serafina rode near the front of the group, dressed in soft traveling clothes, entirely impractical for genuine wilderness patrol, her posture radiating the same delicate uncertainty she displayed whenever Damien or the council were nearby. Elena rode a short distance behind her, watching carefully, while Tobias moved along the flanking positions with 2 other trusted guards who had been briefed only on the barest necessary details of the plan. The ridge itself was known for occasional encounters with rogue wolves, unaffiliated packs that roamed the border territories, seeking easy targets among unprotected travelers. It was dangerous enough to justify a full guard escort, but the specific stretch of trail Elena had chosen for today's patrol was one she and Tobias knew well from years of prior service, familiar enough that they could stage a controlled scenario without exposing anyone to genuine harm. As the group rounded a bend where the trail narrowed between 2 rocky outcroppings, 3 figures emerged from the trees ahead, cloaked and moving, with deliberate aggression. Elena recognized them immediately as Tobias's chosen accomplices, warriors sworn to secrecy, who had agreed to stage a controlled ambush, convincing enough to trigger genuine instinct in anyone caught within it. The guards at the front of the patrol reacted immediately, several drawing weapons and shouting warnings, the chaos of the staged encounter unfolding with enough realistic urgency that even Elena felt her pulse quicken, despite knowing the truth behind it. She watched Serafina closely, every muscle in her own body tensed with anticipation. For a fraction of a second, Serafina's face registered genuine alarm, her eyes widening at the sudden appearance of hooded figures blocking the trail ahead. But what followed was not the frozen panic or desperate flight Elena had expected from a genuine trauma survivor. Instead, Serafina's entire body shifted into a fighting stance with startling speed, her soft traveling cloak discarded in a single fluid motion as she pulled a hidden blade from beneath her sleeve, a weapon Elena had not even known she was carrying. She moved forward, not backward, positioning herself between the threat and the rest of the group, with the confident precision of a trained warrior, stepping naturally into a protective role. Her blade work was immaculate, striking with controlled efficiency as she engaged the nearest of the staged attackers, disarming him within seconds, using a technique so advanced that Elena recognized it from the highest levels of combat training available in any pack territory. The staged attacker, following his instructions to feign retreat once genuinely challenged, stumbled backward and fled into the trees, but Serafina pursued for several steps before catching herself, some instinct finally overriding her combat reflexes as she remembered the audience watching her every move. She stopped abruptly, her blade lowering slightly as her breathing shifted from the controlled rhythm of a fighter to something more theatrical, gasping and trembling as though the exertion of a single engagement had left her overwhelmed. But it was too late. Elena had watched every second of the encounter, and more importantly, Tobias had positioned himself at an angle specifically chosen to capture the entire sequence, his own trusted witness beside him, confirming every detail of what they had just observed. Serafina's mask had slipped completely, revealing beneath it not a fragile, traumatized survivor, but a warrior of considerable skill and training, someone who had reacted to genuine perceived danger, with instincts far too refined to belong to anyone claiming years of helpless victimhood. "Are you all right?" one of the guards asked, rushing to Serafina's side as she sank dramatically to her knees, her blade already vanished back beneath her sleeve as though it had never existed. "I don't know what came over me," Serafina said, her voice trembling with practiced uncertainty. "I just reacted. I was so afraid." Elena dismounted and approached slowly, studying the woman kneeling in the dirt before her, still maintaining her performance even now, even after everything Elena and Tobias had just witnessed with their own eyes. "That was remarkable work with that blade," Elena said, keeping her voice carefully neutral, testing to see how far Serafina would push her explanation. Serafina looked up, her eyes wide and glistening with what appeared to be genuine tears, though Elena had grown skilled enough at reading this woman's performances to recognize the calculation behind them. "I told you," she said softly. "My body remembers things my mind tries to forget. I didn't even realize what I was doing until it was already finished." It was a clever explanation, flexible enough to account for whatever level of skill witnesses had observed, vague enough to avoid outright contradiction, while still maintaining the fiction of unconscious, trauma-driven reflex rather than deliberate training. Elena recognized the skill behind the deflection, even as she recognized its fundamental dishonesty. "We should return to the estate," Elena said finally, deciding not to press further in front of the guards, several of whom were already watching Serafina with renewed sympathy, despite what they had just witnessed. "You've had quite a shock." The ride back to the estate passed in tense silence, Elena's mind racing through everything they had captured during the staged encounter. She had proof now, real and undeniable proof witnessed by multiple guards and captured in careful detail by Tobias and his companion. Serafina's combat skills were not the confused, unconscious reflexes of a traumatized survivor. They were the deliberate, practiced movements of someone trained extensively in advanced fighting techniques, skills that took years of dedicated instruction to develop, and could not possibly be explained away by vague references to childhood memories or unconscious muscle memory. That evening, Elena met with Tobias in the same storage room they had used for their previous strategy sessions, both of them still processing the intensity of what they had witnessed on the ridge. "Did you get everything clearly?" Elena asked. Tobias nodded. Marcus saw it too, from a different angle. "We both watched her disarm that attacker, using a technique only taught in the elite combat academies. That's not something you pick up by accident, and it's certainly not something a fragile trauma survivor would demonstrate without conscious awareness. We need to bring this to the council," Elena said. "Not just to Damien privately, where he can dismiss it or explain it away again. We need witnesses, formal testimony, and the full weight of everything we've gathered presented together in a setting where denial becomes impossible." Tobias agreed, though his expression remained troubled. "She'll fight back," he warned. "A woman skilled enough to construct this entire deception, skilled enough to turn half the pack against you with nothing but tears and whispered confidences, she won't simply accept exposure without a counterattack of her own." Elena understood the truth of that warning better than anyone. She had watched Serafina's calculating mind at work for weeks now, had seen the swift, seamless way she adapted her explanations to fit whatever evidence threatened to expose her. Whatever came next, whatever confrontation awaited them in the council chamber, Elena knew it would not be a simple matter of presenting evidence and watching the truth prevail without resistance. "Let her fight back," Elena said finally, steel settling into her voice as she thought of everything Serafina had cost her already. The wedding day interrupted, the whispers turning the pack against her, the growing distance between herself and the husband she loved. "I've gathered enough proof now that no amount of tears or clever explanations will save her. It's time to end this." Word of the council meeting spread quickly through the estate, and by the following morning, Elena sensed a shift in the atmosphere that told her Serafina had already begun preparing her counterattack. She encountered fewer friendly faces in the hallways, fewer nods of respect from guards who had once treated her with the deference owed to an alpha's wife. Instead, she caught wary, uncertain glances, the kind reserved for someone whose standing within the pack had grown suddenly precarious. She found Damien in the council chamber that afternoon, already deep in conversation with Serafina, who sat close beside him, with red-rimmed eyes and trembling hands, the very picture of a woman pushed to the brink of collapse. Elena paused in the doorway, watching the scene unfold, understanding immediately that Serafina had gotten to Damien first, shaping the narrative before Elena had the chance to present her own evidence. "Elena," Damien said, his voice carrying a coldness she had never heard directed at her before. "Serafina has told me something deeply troubling. She says you cornered her yesterday morning, threatened her, told her that unless she left the pack immediately, you would ensure she suffered consequences far worse than exile." Elena felt the accusation land like a physical blow, the audacity of the lie so complete that for a moment she could only stare at Serafina in stunned disbelief. "That never happened," Elena said finally, forcing her voice to remain steady, despite the anger building beneath her composure. "I have not spoken to her privately since before my journey to Ashford territory. She has no reason to lie about something so serious," Damien said, though Elena noted a flicker of uncertainty beneath his defensive tone, as though some part of him recognized the strangeness of the accusation, even as he felt compelled to defend the woman beside him. "And I have no reason to threaten a woman I've been carefully investigating, precisely because I don't trust her," Elena countered. "Damien, think about the timing of this accusation. I told you 3 days ago that I intended to bring evidence before the full council. Now, suddenly, she claims I threatened her? This is exactly the kind of deflection I warned you she was capable of." Serafina's tears intensified at Elena's words, her shoulders shaking with what appeared to be overwhelming distress. "I knew she wouldn't believe me," she whispered to Damien, loud enough for Elena to hear clearly. "I told you she would say something like this. She's very good at making herself sound reasonable." Elena watched the exchange with growing frustration, recognizing the trap Serafina had constructed with practiced efficiency. Any defense Elena offered could be reframed as further evidence of manipulation. Any calm explanation twisted into proof of calculated deception. The very qualities that made Elena a capable investigator, her composure under pressure, her careful attention to logical inconsistency, were being used against her as evidence of coldness and cunning. "I request that the full council convene tomorrow morning," Elena said, refusing to be drawn further into a circular argument she could not win in this setting. "I have evidence, witnessed by multiple guards, that contradicts everything Serafina has claimed about her past and her capabilities. Let the council examine it properly, with formal testimony, rather than continuing this conversation in private." Damien hesitated, glancing between his wife and the trembling woman beside him, clearly torn between competing loyalties he had never expected to face. "Fine," he said finally, "tomorrow morning. Full council. But Elena, I need you to understand that if this evidence turns out to be less conclusive than you believe, the damage to your standing within this pack may be significant. I understand the risk," Elena said. "I'm willing to accept it, because I know what I witnessed is true." That evening, as Elena prepared her presentation for the following morning's council meeting, organizing her journal entries, coordinating with Tobias and Marcus to ensure their testimony would be clear and consistent, She received an unexpected visit from Corwin, the elder council member who had first warned her about Serafina weeks earlier. "I heard about the accusation against you," Corwin said, settling into a chair across from Elena's desk, with the careful movements of a man whose joints had grown stiff with age. "I wanted you to know that not everyone on the council has been swayed by her performances. Several of us have grown increasingly suspicious of the pattern we've observed since her arrival." "Thank you," Elena said, feeling a measure of relief at the confirmation that she was not entirely alone in her skepticism. "Tomorrow, I intend to present everything I've gathered, the truth about her exile from the Ashford Pack, the connection to Thornwood, the combat skills she displayed during the staged encounter on the Eastern Ridge." Corwin nodded slowly, his expression grave. "Be prepared for her to fight harder than she has until now," he warned. "A cornered predator becomes most dangerous in the moments before capture, not after. If she senses tomorrow's meeting will expose her completely, she may attempt something more drastic than simple accusations and manipulated sympathy." Elena considered his warning carefully, understanding the wisdom behind it, even as uncertainty gnawed at the edges of her confidence. "What do you think she might do?" "I don't know," Corwin admitted, "but I've watched enough political maneuvering across 3 generations of leadership in this pack to recognize desperation when it begins to show itself. Watch your surroundings carefully tonight, Elena. Trust nothing that seems too convenient, and keep those you trust close until this matter is resolved." Elena thanked him for the warning, and spent the remainder of the evening reviewing her evidence one final time, ensuring every detail was organized and ready for presentation. She sent word to Tobias and Marcus, confirming their availability for the following morning, and arranged for Mara to be present as well, given her own observations of the whispered rumors Serafina had spread throughout the household staff. As the estate settled into nighttime quiet, Elena found herself unable to sleep, Corwin's warning echoing through her thoughts, alongside the memory of Serafina's calculating eyes during their confrontation in the training yard. She rose from her bed and walked to her window, looking out over the darkened grounds, and noticed a faint light moving through the gardens below, too erratic and quick to belong to a simple patrol guard making rounds. She dressed quickly, strapping her blade beneath her sleeve, as Serafina had done during the staged encounter, and made her way down through the quiet corridors of the estate, following the direction where she had glimpsed the light. The gardens were silent except for the whisper of wind through the hedges, and Elena moved carefully along the shadowed paths, every sense alert to potential danger. She found the source of the light near the eastern wall, close to the treasury building where the pack's most valuable resources were stored. A figure crouched near the treasury door, working at the lock with quick, practiced movements, and as Elena crept closer, she recognized the silhouette immediately despite the darkness. Serafina, dressed once again in dark, practical clothing, working to breach the treasury under cover of night. Elena's mind raced through the implications. Whatever plans Serafina had been building toward for weeks, whatever alliance she maintained with Thornwood, it appeared to be accelerating rapidly now that exposure loomed on the horizon. Perhaps Serafina intended to secure resources for a hasty escape, or perhaps something more calculated, a final theft or sabotage designed to weaken the crosspack before her true nature was revealed to the entire council. Elena remained hidden, watching as Serafina finally succeeded in breaching the lock and slipped inside the treasury building. This was the opportunity Elena had been waiting for, undeniable proof of criminal activity, witnessed with her own eyes, evidence that could not possibly be explained away or twisted into further accusations against Elena herself. She needed a witness, someone who could confirm what she was about to see, and she needed to act quickly before Serafina completed whatever task had brought her to the treasury under cover of darkness. Elena moved swiftly back through the gardens, her heart pounding with urgency as she made her way toward the guard barracks near the western wing. She found Tobias awake, still reviewing notes for the following morning's council presentation, and quickly explained what she had witnessed at the treasury building. "We need witnesses now, before she finishes and slips away," Elena said, already moving toward the door. "Bring Marcus if he's nearby. We catch her in the act, and there will be nothing left for her to explain away tomorrow." Tobias roused Marcus from a nearby room, and the 3 of them made their way back toward the treasury building as quickly as silence would allow, moving through the shadowed gardens with the practiced stealth of experienced warriors. As they approached, Elena could see that the treasury door remained slightly ajar, faint light flickering from within. They positioned themselves carefully around the entrance, and Elena signaled for Tobias to remain hidden, while she and Marcus prepared to confirm what lay inside. She pushed the door open slowly, revealing Serafina crouched beside an open strongbox, several pouches of coin, and a collection of important pack documents spread across the floor beside her. "Serafina," Elena said, stepping into the doorway with Marcus close behind her. Serafina's head snapped up, and for the briefest moment, Elena saw something raw and unguarded flash across her features. Genuine alarm unmixed with any performance or calculation, but it vanished almost instantly, replaced by the familiar wide-eyed fragility she had perfected over months of careful practice. "Elena, please," she said, her voice trembling as she rose slowly to her feet. "This isn't what it looks like. I was afraid. After what happened on the ridge yesterday, I thought perhaps I should have resources available in case I needed to flee quickly if something happened to me here. You're standing in a locked treasury building in the middle of the night with packed documents spread across the floor," Marcus said, his voice hard with disbelief. "That requires quite a lot of explaining." Serafina's eyes darted between the two of them, calculating, searching for an angle that might still salvage the situation. "Please," she said again, softer this time, directing her plea specifically toward Elena. "I know you don't trust me, and perhaps you have reasons to feel that way, but this isn't a crime. I was simply frightened and unprepared. If you bring this before the council, they'll see it as further proof of my instability, rather than understanding the fear behind it." "That won't work anymore," Elena said, feeling a strange calm settle over her now that the moment of true confrontation had finally arrived. "I know about Ashford, Serafina. I spoke with Garrick myself. I know about your exile, about the manipulation that led to it. I know about your meetings with the Thornwood representative in the forest, and I know your combat skills are far more advanced than anything you've claimed to remember from childhood lessons." Serafina's composure cracked visibly for the first time since her arrival at the Cross estate, her carefully maintained mask slipping to reveal something colder and sharper underneath. "You don't understand what you're interfering with," she said, her voice losing its trembling quality entirely, replaced by a controlled, dangerous edge that matched the voice Elena had overheard in the forest clearing weeks earlier. "Then explain it to the council tomorrow," Elena said. "Explain everything, in front of witnesses, with full documentation of what we've found." Serafina's eyes narrowed, calculation replacing the last traces of her performed vulnerability. For a moment, Elena tensed, prepared for the possibility of violence, remembering the swift, lethal efficiency Serafina had displayed during the staged encounter on the ridge. But instead, Serafina simply straightened her shoulders and offered a cold, humorless smile. "You think exposing me changes anything," she said. "Damien's affection for me runs deeper than you understand. Even if you bring your evidence before the entire council, do you truly believe he'll choose suspicion and accusation over the woman he spent weeks protecting and comforting?" "I believe he'll choose the truth," Elena said, though a small, uncertain part of her wondered if Serafina's confidence held some measure of validity. "Whatever hold you've built over him, it's built on lies. Lies collapse eventually, no matter how carefully constructed." Marcus moved to secure the treasury door, while Tobias emerged from his hidden position, and together the three of them escorted Serafina back toward the main estate, ensuring she had no opportunity to slip away or destroy evidence before the morning's council meeting. Serafina remained silent during the walk, her earlier composure returning gradually, rebuilding itself piece by piece, as though she were already preparing her next performance for whatever audience awaited her. The following morning, the full council assembled in the great hall, the same room where Elena's wedding had been so dramatically interrupted weeks earlier. Damien sat at the head of the table, his expression carefully neutral, though Elena could see the tension in his shoulders as Serafina took her seat, once again composed and delicate, betraying no sign of the desperate criminal caught breaking into the treasury only hours before. Elena rose to address the council, her voice steady, despite the weight of everything resting on this single presentation. She recounted her journey to Ashford territory, Garrick's testimony about Serafina's exile, the documented pattern of manipulation that had already damaged one pack before Serafina ever arrived at the Cross estate. She described the secret meetings in the forest, the signet ring connecting Serafina to the Thornwood pack, the staged encounter on the eastern ridge that had revealed combat skills far beyond anything a genuine trauma survivor should possess. Finally, she described the treasury break-in from the previous night, calling Tobias and Marcus forward to confirm every detail of what they had witnessed. The council chamber fell into stunned silence as the full scope of the deception was laid bare, piece by careful piece, until even the most sympathetic council members could no longer deny the pattern forming before them. Serafina attempted one final defense, her voice trembling with practiced desperation as she turned toward Damien, appealing directly to the emotional bond she had cultivated so carefully over the preceding weeks. "Damien, please," she said. "You know me. You know my heart. Everything they're describing can be explained, misunderstood, twisted by a woman who has never trusted me from the moment I arrived." But something had shifted in Damien's expression as Elena's evidence accumulated, witness after witness, detail after undeniable detail. The doubt that had flickered briefly during their earlier conversation now bloomed into something harder, more resolute, as he finally allowed himself to see clearly what had been hidden beneath weeks of careful manipulation. "The treasury break-in," he said slowly, his voice heavy with the weight of realization. "Explain that to me, Serafina. Explain why a woman too fragile to attend council meetings was skilled enough to breach a secured lock in the middle of the night." Serafina's composure finally shattered completely under the direct pressure of his question, the careful mask she had maintained for weeks, crumbling away to reveal something colder and more calculating underneath, an expression the entire council now recognized as genuine for the first time since her arrival. "You have no idea what you've just destroyed," she said, her voice stripped of all its former softness, addressing the room with a coldness that confirmed every suspicion Elena had gathered over the preceding weeks. This pack's weakness, its blind sympathy for anyone claiming victimhood, made this so simple. Perhaps next time Thorn would send someone less concerned with subtlety. The admission, delivered with such casual confidence, sent a ripple of shock through the assembled council. Damien rose from his seat, his expression a mixture of fury and heartbreak, the full weight of weeks of misplaced trust finally crashing down upon him in a single devastating moment of clarity. "Take her into custody," he said, his voice carrying an authority Elena had not heard from him since before Serafina's arrival. "She will remain confined until we determine the full extent of what she's done and what she intended to accomplish within our borders." As guards moved to secure Serafina, she offered one final glance toward Elena, cold and calculating despite her capture, a look that promised this confrontation was far from truly finished, no matter how thoroughly her deception had just been exposed before the entire pack council. The days following Serafina's exposure brought a wave of activity through the Cross estate as the council worked to understand the full scope of what had nearly happened within their borders. Under careful questioning, Serafina eventually revealed fragments of her true plan, confirming what Elena had already suspected. Thornwood had sent her to weaken the Cross pack from within, exploiting Damien's protective instincts and compassion to gain access to sensitive information, weaken council unity, and ultimately create enough internal chaos to justify a hostile move against Cross territory when the moment seemed most advantageous. The stolen documents recovered from the treasury contained detailed information about patrol schedules, resource allocations, and defensive weaknesses along the northern border, exactly the kind of intelligence that would have proven devastating in the hands of a rival pack preparing for conflict. Elena's discovery had prevented what might have become a catastrophic breach of the Cross pack's security, though the realization of how close they had come to disaster left everyone in the council chamber sobered by the narrow margin of their escape. Serafina was eventually exiled beyond the northern borders, under heavy guard, banned permanently from Cross territory, and formally denounced to neighboring packs as a known manipulator and spy. Thornwood's Alpha, when confronted with evidence of the plot, denied any official involvement, though few among the Cross Council believed the denial carried much genuine weight. Diplomatic tensions between the two territories grew sharper in the aftermath, though outright conflict was avoided through careful negotiation and Damien's renewed, clear-eyed leadership. Elena found Damien alone in his study several evenings after Serafina's exile, staring out the window toward the guest wing that now stood empty and silent, stripped of the presence that had disrupted so much of their early marriage. He turned when she entered, his expression carrying a weight of guilt and regret that had settled over him since the council meeting. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "Not just for the wedding, though that alone deserves more than I've offered you so far, but for every moment afterward when I chose to trust her story over your judgment. You tried to warn me from the very beginning, and I dismissed your concerns as jealousy, when they were nothing of the sort." Elena crossed the room and sat beside him, understanding the difficulty of the admission he was working through. "You were protecting someone you believed was vulnerable," she said. "That instinct isn't a flaw, Damien. It's part of what makes you a good alpha. She simply exploited that instinct more skillfully than either of us anticipated." "That doesn't excuse how I treated you," Damien said. "I let the entire pack believe you were cruel and jealous, while you were quietly gathering the evidence that ultimately saved us from a threat I refused to see. You deserved my trust from the beginning, and I failed to give it to you when it mattered most." Elena considered his words carefully, weighing the genuine remorse she heard in his voice against the weeks of hurt and isolation she had endured, while he remained blind to Serafina's manipulation. "I won't pretend those weeks didn't hurt," she said honestly. "Watching you dismiss my concerns while an entire pack turned against me was one of the hardest things I've experienced. But I also understand how skilled she was at what she did. You weren't the only one she deceived, Damien. An entire council, dozens of servants, guards who had served this pack faithfully for years, all of them fell under her influence to some degree." "How did you see through it when no one else could?" Damien asked. Elena thought about the question for a long moment before answering. "I suppose I've spent enough years training myself to notice details others overlook," she said. "But more than that, I never let myself become so attached to a story that I stopped questioning whether it made sense. Trust is important, Damien, but so is careful observation. The two aren't opposites. They can exist together, if we remember to hold on to both." Damien reached for her hand, and Elena allowed him to take it, feeling some of the tension that had built between them over the preceding weeks begin to ease, though she understood the full rebuilding of trust between them would take considerably longer than a single conversation. "I want to earn back what I lost these past weeks," he said. "Not just your trust, but the partnership we were supposed to build together as Alpha and his wife. I want us to lead this pack together, with your judgment valued as highly as my own, not dismissed whenever it becomes inconvenient." "That would mean a great deal to me," Elena said, and for the first time since the disrupted wedding ceremony, she felt something like genuine hope for the future they had originally planned to build together. In the weeks that followed, Elena noticed real changes in how Damien approached his leadership responsibilities. He consulted her more frequently on council matters, valued her observations during patrol planning, and made a point of publicly acknowledging her role in uncovering Serafina's deception, ensuring the pack understood the truth of what had nearly happened, and the courage it had taken Elena to pursue evidence, despite widespread skepticism and social isolation. Corwin, ever perceptive, observed the shift in their partnership with quiet approval during one of the regular council sessions. "It seems our Alpha has learned an important lesson about the value of a sharp mind willing to question convenient stories," he remarked to Elena after one particularly productive meeting. "Not every pack survives learning that lesson without significant cost. We were fortunate that yours came before the true damage was done." Elena reflected on his words as she walked the grounds that evening, the same perimeter path she had walked so many times during the difficult weeks of her investigation, back when isolation and suspicion had been her only companions in uncovering the truth. The gardens looked different now, no longer haunted by the shadow of secret meetings and hidden agendas, simply peaceful in the quiet evening light. She thought about Serafina occasionally in the months that followed, wondering whether Thornwood would attempt another approach against cross territory, whether the woman's particular skills would be deployed again against some other unsuspecting pack somewhere along the border regions. But mostly, she found herself focused on the present, on the steady rebuilding of trust between herself and Damien, on the growing respect she now commanded throughout the council for her role in protecting the pack from a threat that had nearly gone entirely unnoticed. The pack itself recovered gradually from the unsettling weeks of Serafina's influence, servants and guards alike processing the uncomfortable realization of how thoroughly they had been deceived by careful performance and manufactured sympathy. Mara worked to rebuild trust among the household staff, gently helping those who had spread rumors about Elena understand the sophisticated manipulation that had led them astray, and slowly, the whispers that had once painted Elena as cold and jealous transformed into quiet respect for the patience and courage she had shown throughout the entire ordeal. On a clear evening, nearly 2 months after the council meeting that exposed Serafina's true nature, Damien found Elena in the training yard, running through the same forms she had practiced on countless mornings during the difficult weeks of her investigation. He watched from the doorway for a moment before joining her, picking up a practice blade of his own and falling into step beside her, matching her rhythm with the ease of long familiarity. "I think I finally understand what you were trying to protect this whole time," he said, as they moved through the forms together. Strike and block and pivot, the same disciplined rhythm that had steadied Elena through every uncertain night of her long investigation. Not just me from a dangerous deception, but the very foundation of what this pack is supposed to stand for. Trust that's earned through honesty, not manufactured through manipulation. Elena smiled, lowering her blade as the evening light faded toward twilight around them. "That's exactly it," she said. "A pack built on illusions can never truly stand strong, no matter how comforting those illusions might feel in the moment. We're stronger now because we chose to face the truth, even when it was difficult, even when it cost us both something along the way." Damien nodded, reaching for her hand as they walked together back toward the estate, the lights of their home glowing warmly against the deepening evening sky. Whatever challenges still awaited them, whatever future conflicts might arise from Thornwood's ambitions or other threats along their borders, Elena understood now that she and Damien faced them together, bound not by blind trust or convenient illusions, but by a partnership built on honesty, respect, and the hard-won understanding that some of the most dangerous threats wear the softest, most sympathetic disguises, waiting patiently for someone willing to see past the performance to the truth hidden carefully underneath.